At my son's engagement dinner, I accidentally spilled wine. My husband snapped his fingers in front of the guests. "Look at her, clumsy housewife. Get on your knees and clean it, now." As I bent down crying, the bride's billionaire father stood up and kicked the chair away. He knelt on the floor with me, held my face, and whispered, "Elizabeth, you disappeared 30 years ago. I never stopped loving you." I froze. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Elizabeth and I'm 59 years old. For 39 years, I've been married to Bradley, and for 39 years, I've felt invisible. Tonight was supposed to be special, our son Dylan's engagement dinner at the Preston Valley Country Club. Instead, it became the night that changed everything. I should have known something would go wrong. It always did when Bradley wanted to impress people. The crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the Persian rugs as I moved carefully between the tables, serving wine to the guests. Yes, serving. At my own son's engagement party. "Elizabeth, hurry up with that wine," Bradley snapped from across the room, his voice cutting through the gentle murmur of conversation. These people don't have all night. I felt my cheeks burn as several guests turned to look at me. Mrs. Henderson from Bradley's car dealership shook her head disapprovingly, while the country club members whispered behind their cloth napkins. I was the only wife serving at her own son's celebration, but Bradley insisted I couldn't afford the catering staff. "Coming, dear," I replied softly, gripping the wine bottle tighter. The bottle felt heavier than usual in my hands, or maybe my hands were just shakier. At 59, I'd learned to keep my voice steady even when my heart was breaking. Dylan sat at the head table with his fiancée, Sophia. She was beautiful, 35 years old with long auburn hair and intelligent green eyes. More importantly, she was kind to me, which made her a rarity in Bradley's world. Her father sat beside her, a distinguished man in his early 60s with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes. I'd heard he was some sort of businessman, very successful, but he seemed different from the usual crowd Bradley tried to impress. As I approached their table, Sophia smiled warmly at me. "Thank you, Mrs. Morrison. You don't need to serve us. Please, sit and enjoy the party." Bradley's laugh boomed across the room. "Don't mind Elizabeth, Sophia. She enjoys keeping busy, gives her purpose." I forced a smile and continued pouring wine. The shame burned in my chest, but I was used to it. 39 years of marriage had taught me that fighting back only made things worse. At least Dylan looked uncomfortable with his father's comment. That gave me some small comfort. The disaster happened as I reached for Sophia's father's glass. My sleeve caught the edge of his water glass, and everything seemed to move in slow motion. The wine bottle tilted, and deep red wine splashed across the pristine white tablecloth and onto the expensive Persian rug beneath our feet. The entire room fell silent. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," I whispered, frantically reaching for napkins. My hands shook as I tried to contain the spreading stain. Bradley's face turned purple with rage. He stood up so quickly his chair scraped against the floor, the sound echoing through the sudden silence. Every guest in the room was watching us now. "Look at her," Bradley announced, his voice dripping with disgust. He snapped his fingers in front of everyone, doctors, lawyers, business owners, people I'd known for years. "Clumsy housewife. This is exactly why I handle everything important in this family." My heart pounded as I knelt down, trying to blot the wine from the rug with my napkin. The smell of the wine mixed with the scent of shame and humiliation. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, judging me, pitying me. "Get on your knees and clean it now," Bradley commanded, pointing at the stain. "And do it properly this time." The room was so quiet I could hear the tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. I was already kneeling, but something about the way he said it, like I was his servant instead of his wife, made my soul crack a little more. Tears started flowing down my cheeks as I scrubbed at the expensive rug, my knees pressing into the hard floor through my thin dress. That's when everything changed. Sophia's father, I still didn't know his name, stood up abruptly. His chair made a sharp scraping sound as he pushed it back with enough force that it nearly toppled over. The anger in his eyes was unlike anything I'd ever seen. "What did you just say to her?" His voice was low, dangerous. Bradley straightened up, clearly not expecting to be challenged. "Excuse me?" Without hesitation, Sophia's father kicked his own chair away from the table. It crashed to the floor with a bang that made several guests gasp. Then he did something that stopped my heart. He knelt down on the floor beside me. His expensive suit pressed against the wine-stained rug as he gently placed his hands on either side of my face, tilting my chin up so I had to look at him. His touch was so gentle, so different from Bradley's rough handling. When our eyes met, his face went completely white. "Elizabeth?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "Elizabeth Marie?" I stared into his eyes, warm brown eyes that I recognized even after all these years, eyes that had looked at me with love when I was 19 years old, eyes that had haunted my dreams for 39 years. "Otto?" The name escaped my lips like a prayer. His thumbs gently wiped the tears from my cheeks as he spoke, his voice barely audible. "You disappeared 39 years ago. I looked for you everywhere. I never stopped loving you." The room around us ceased to exist. The shocked gasps from the guests, Bradley's stammering confusion, Dylan's wide-eyed stare, none of it mattered. All I could see was Otto, the man I'd loved with every fiber of my being when I was young. The man I'd been forced to abandon when I discovered I was pregnant with Dylan. I had to. I started to say, but my voice failed me. Otto's eyes searched my face, taking in the lines that 39 years had carved there, the sadness that had dimmed my smile. "What happened to you? Where did you go?" Before I could answer, Bradley's voice exploded above us. "What the hell is going on here? Elizabeth, get up right now!" Otto's jaw clenched, but he didn't take his hands from my face. Instead, he helped me stand, his movements protective and gentle. He was taller than I remembered, his shoulders broader, but his touch was exactly the same, careful and loving. "Elizabeth," Otto said, his voice stronger now, addressing the whole room, "is clearly a lady who deserves respect, not humiliation." He turned to face Bradley, and I saw something in his expression that made my husband step back. "I'm Otto Blackwell. I own Blackwell Industries, and you, sir, just made the mistake of your life." I heard several guests gasp. Everyone in Dallas knew the name Otto Blackwell. He was worth hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe more. But all I could think about was the young man who used to read poetry to me under the oak tree at Eastfield Community College. "Dad?" Sophia's voice cut through the tension. She was staring at Otto with complete confusion. "You know Dylan's mother?" Otto glanced at his daughter. Our children were engaged to each other, I realized with shock, then looked back at me. "I knew Elizabeth a long time ago. We were." He paused, his eyes never leaving mine. "Very close friends." Bradley's face had gone from purple to pale. "This is ridiculous. Elizabeth, we're leaving. Now." But Otto stepped between us, and for the first time in 39 years, someone stood up for me. "I don't think Elizabeth wants to leave," Otto said calmly. "Do you, Elizabeth?" Everyone was looking at me. Bradley with rage and confusion, Dylan with concern, Sophia with curiosity, and Otto with something that looked like hope. After nearly 4 decades of being silenced, I had a choice to make. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. How could I explain 39 years of secrets in front of a room full of people? How could I tell my son that his father wasn't the man he thought he was? How could I admit that I'd been trapped in this marriage since I was 19 years old? Otto seemed to understand my struggle. He gently took my hand, the same hand that wore Bradley's wedding ring, and squeezed it softly. "You don't have to say anything right now," he said quietly. But Elizabeth, you should know that some of us never forgot you. The way he said it made my heart stop. After all these years, all this pain, Otto still remembered the girl I used to be. The girl who had dreams and ambitions and believed in love. The girl I'd buried when I became Bradley's wife. As I stood there in my wine-stained dress, surrounded by shocked guests and facing the two most important men from my past and present, I realized that my carefully constructed life was about to crumble. But for the first time in 39 years, I wasn't sure if that was a bad thing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the bed I'd shared with Bradley for 39 years, staring at the ceiling while he snored beside me. The events at the country club played over and over in my mind like a broken record. Otto's face when he recognized me. The gentle way he'd touched my cheek. The shock in his voice when he whispered my name. But mostly, I remembered the way he'd said he never stopped loving me. Bradley had barely spoken to me on the drive home. His silence was almost worse than his usual criticism. I knew he was planning something, probably a way to forbid me from seeing Otto again. At 59, I was still being treated like a child who couldn't make her own decisions. As the first light of dawn crept through our bedroom curtains, I gave up on sleep and walked to the kitchen. The house felt different somehow, like the walls themselves knew that everything was about to change. I made coffee with shaking hands and sat at the small table where I'd eaten thousands of lonely meals over the years. That's when the memories came flooding back, as vivid as if they'd happened yesterday. 1984. I was 18 years old, working part-time at the campus bookstore while studying English literature at Eastfield Community College. My parents had died in a car accident 2 years earlier, leaving me with just enough insurance money to pay for school if I was careful with every penny. I first saw Otto in Professor Martinez's poetry class. He sat in the back row, always arriving exactly 3 minutes before class started, carrying a worn leather notebook and a cup of coffee that smelled like vanilla. He was 19, a year older than me, studying business but taking literature classes for fun, as he told me later. What struck me first weren't his warm brown eyes or his gentle smile. It was the way he listened. When other students spoke, Otto gave them his complete attention, nodding thoughtfully, asking questions that showed he really cared about their opinions. In a world where I'd felt invisible since my parents' death, Otto's attention was like sunlight after a long winter. We started talking after class about the poems we'd read. Then those conversations moved to the campus coffee shop, then to long walks around the small lake behind the school. Otto had dreams, big dreams. He wanted to build a business empire, not for the money, but to create something lasting, something that would help people. I want to build affordable housing, he told me one autumn afternoon as we sat under our favorite oak tree, its leaves turning gold around us. Good homes for families who work hard but can't afford much. Everyone deserves a safe place to raise their children. I loved listening to him talk about his plans. His eyes lit up when he described the houses he wanted to build, the communities he wanted to create. But what I loved most was that he included me in those dreams. When we're married, he'd say, not if, but when, because we both knew it was inevitable, you can help me design the interiors. You have such an eye for making spaces feel like home. Those were the happiest months of my life. We'd study together in the library, sharing whispered jokes between the stacks of books. Otto would bring me wildflowers he picked on the way to campus. Daisies, black-eyed Susans, whatever was blooming. I pressed one of those flowers in my copy of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's Sonnets, the book Otto had given me for my 19th birthday. We made love for the first time in November, in Otto's tiny apartment off campus. He was so gentle, so careful with me. Afterward, he held me close and whispered, "I'm going to love you for the rest of my life, Elizabeth Marie. I promise you that." I believed him. God help me. I believed every word. The pregnancy test came back positive in February of 1985. I was 3 weeks late, and I knew before I even took the test. My body felt different, changed in ways I couldn't explain. I sat on the floor of my tiny bathroom, staring at those two pink lines, and my first emotion was joy. Otto and I were going to have a baby. We'd talked about children. He wanted 4, I wanted 3. We'd compromise on 3 and see what happened. We weren't married yet, but we'd been talking about it constantly. Otto had been saving money for a ring, showing me sketches of the simple band he wanted to buy. I practically floated to campus that day, excited to tell him the news. We'd figure it out together, like we figured out everything else. Maybe we'd get married sooner than planned. Maybe we'd have to move to a bigger apartment. It would all work out because we loved each other. I never got the chance to tell him. Bradley Morrison appeared in my life like a storm cloud on a sunny day. He was 22, 4 years older than Otto, and he managed his father's car dealership. More importantly, he was Margaret Morrison's brother, and Margaret was my supervisor at the bookstore. "My brother's been asking about you," Margaret told me that Thursday afternoon as I shelved returned textbooks. "He saw you here last week and thought you were pretty. He wants to take you to dinner." I laughed, not meanly, just genuinely amused. "That's very flattering, Margaret, but I have a boyfriend." Margaret's expression grew serious. "Elizabeth, honey, you need to think practically. Bradley has a good job, money in the bank, a future. That college boy you've been seeing." She shook her head. "Those kinds of dreams don't pay bills." "Otto's not just dreams," I protested. "He's smart and hardworking and penniless," Margaret interrupted. "Look, I like you, Elizabeth. You're a good worker, responsible. But you're also an orphan with no family to help you. If something happened, if you got pregnant or sick or lost your job, what would that boy do for you? Bradley could take care of you properly." I tried to dismiss the conversation, but Margaret was persistent. She arranged for Bradley to accidentally run into me at the bookstore several times. He was handsome in a conventional way, with dark hair and blue eyes, and he did seem financially stable. But there was something about him that made me uncomfortable. He looked at me like I was something to be possessed rather than loved. The real problem started when I missed work due to morning sickness. I'd told Margaret I had the flu, but she was too observant. 2 weeks later, she cornered me in the break room. "You're pregnant, aren't you?" My face must have given me away because Margaret nodded grimly. "Does he know?" she asked. "Not yet. I'm going to tell Otto tonight." "Otto?" Margaret looked genuinely shocked. "Elizabeth, that boy can barely afford his own rent. How is he going to support a wife and baby? He'll probably run the moment you tell him." "He won't run," I said firmly. "Otto loves me." Margaret sighed like she was dealing with a naive child. "Honey, I've seen this story before. College boys love to play house until reality hits. But Bradley—" She paused for effect. "Bradley's been talking about marriage. He really cares about you, Elizabeth. And he could give that baby a name, a future." The words hit me like a physical blow. A name. In 1985, having a baby outside of marriage was still scandalous, especially in our small conservative community. I'd seen how people treated unmarried mothers. The whispers, the judgmental looks, the way doors closed in their faces. But Otto would marry me. I knew he would. We were planning to get married anyway. That's what I thought until Margaret showed me the newspaper clipping. "I didn't want to show you this," she said, her voice full of fake sympathy. "But you need to know who you're really dealing with." The headline read, "Local family's business venture fails, leaves investors millions in debt." Otto's last name was mentioned. His father's construction company had gone bankrupt, taking several investors' life savings with it. According to the article, the Blackwell family was facing lawsuits and had lost their home. "He never told you, did he?" Margaret asked softly. "About his family's money problems?" "Elizabeth, this boy is not just poor. He's from a family that destroys other people financially. Do you really want to tie yourself to that?" My hands shook as I read the article. Otto had mentioned that his father was having some business difficulties, but he'd made it sound temporary, manageable. This made it sound like his entire family was toxic. Think about your baby, Margaret continued. Do you want to raise a child in poverty? With a father who comes from a family of liars? Bradley could give you both security, respectability. He's already told me he'd be willing to marry you despite the situation. Despite the situation. As if my pregnancy was a shameful secret instead of a blessing. I need to think, I whispered. Don't think too long, Margaret warned. Bradley's a good catch, but he won't wait forever, and every day you wait, you'll be showing more. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the phone. I wanted to call Otto, to ask him about the newspaper article, to tell him about the baby. But what if Margaret was right? What if Otto ran when he realized the financial burden? What if his family's problems meant he could never provide for us? I placed my hand on my still flat stomach and thought about my child's future. Did I have the right to condemn my baby to poverty because I was in love? What kind of mother would I be if I chose romance over my child's welfare? The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day walking around the lake where Otto and I had shared so many dreams. By evening, I'd made my decision. I would marry Bradley Morrison. I never told Otto about the pregnancy. Instead, I told him I'd realized we wanted different things, that I needed security more than I needed love. I watched his heart break in his beautiful brown eyes, but I forced myself to stay strong. For the baby. For our future. 2 months later, I was Mrs. Bradley Morrison. Dylan was born 6 months after that, a premature baby who weighed 7 pounds and was perfectly healthy. Bradley never questioned the timing, and I never told him the truth about Dylan's father. For 39 years, I kept that secret. For 39 years, I told myself I'd made the right choice. But sitting in my kitchen at dawn, remembering the gentle way Otto had touched my face just hours before, I wondered if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. The worst part was that Otto had become everything he dreamed of becoming, and more. While I'd spent decades as Bradley's unpaid servant, Otto had built the business empire he'd always talked about. He'd created affordable housing, just like he'd planned. He'd helped thousands of families have safe homes. And according to the way he'd looked at me last night, he'd never forgotten the girl who used to listen to his dreams under the oak tree. I reached into my pocket and pulled out something I'd carried for 39 years. A small silver locket containing the pressed flower Otto had given me on my 19th birthday. I'd hidden it from Bradley all these years, the only piece of my real self that I'd managed to keep. As I sat in my empty kitchen, I opened the locket and looked at the faded flower inside. It was still beautiful, still perfect, preserved just like my love for the man who'd given it to me. And now he was back in my life, just when I thought it was too late for dreams to come true. 3 days passed after the disastrous engagement dinner, and I felt like I was walking through a dream. Bradley had barely spoken to me since that night, which was actually a blessing. His silence meant he was planning something, but for now, I had peace to think clearly for the first time in years. I was in the kitchen Tuesday morning, mechanically washing dishes while Bradley read his newspaper, when the doorbell rang. My heart jumped. We rarely had unexpected visitors, and Bradley liked to control who came to our house. "Elizabeth, get the door," Bradley commanded without looking up from his sports section. I dried my hands on my apron and walked to the front door, expecting to see a delivery person, or maybe one of Bradley's colleagues from the dealership. Instead, through the frosted glass, I saw a tall figure in an expensive suit. My breath caught in my throat. Even after 39 years, I recognized that silhouette. I opened the door, and there was Otto, looking just as nervous as I felt. He was holding a small bouquet of wildflowers, daisies and black-eyed Susans, just like the ones he used to bring me in college. The sight of them made my eyes fill with tears. "Hello, Elizabeth," he said softly. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I got your address from..." He paused, looking embarrassed. "I hired someone to find you years ago. I've known where you lived for a long time, but I never had the courage to approach you. After Sunday night, I couldn't stay away anymore. Otto, I whispered, glancing nervously toward the kitchen where Bradley was still reading. This isn't a good time. Who's at the door, Elizabeth? Bradley's voice boomed from the kitchen. Otto's jaw tightened when he heard Bradley's tone. Even from another room, my husband's voice carried a note of ownership that made my skin crawl. A friend, I called back, my voice shaking slightly. From college. I heard Bradley's newspaper rustle, then his heavy footsteps approaching. Otto stepped closer to the door, his eyes searching my face with concern. Are you afraid of him? Otto asked quietly, and the gentleness in his voice almost broke me. Before I could answer, Bradley appeared behind me, his presence immediately filling the doorway with tension. He was several inches shorter than Otto, but carried himself like he owned the world. Well, well, Bradley said with false joviality. If it isn't the famous Otto Blackwell, what brings you to our humble home? Otto's expression remained polite but cool. I wanted to apologize for the disruption at the engagement dinner. I'm afraid seeing Elizabeth after so many years caught me off guard. I'll bet it did, Bradley replied, his voice carrying an edge. Elizabeth has that effect on people, always causing trouble without meaning to. I watched Otto's hands clench at his sides, and I realized he was fighting to control his temper. The Otto I'd known in college had been gentle, but there was something harder about him now, forged by decades of business dealings and success. Actually, Otto said carefully, I think Elizabeth handled herself with remarkable grace under difficult circumstances. The two men stared at each other for a long moment, and I felt like I was watching a chess match where I was the prize neither player would admit they wanted. Well, Bradley said finally, it was nice of you to stop by, but we're quite busy today. Elizabeth has a lot of housework to catch up on. Actually, I heard myself say, surprising all three of us, I was just about to go grocery shopping. Otto, would you like to join me? We could catch up properly. The silence that followed was deafening. Bradley's face turned that familiar shade of purple, but with Otto standing there, he couldn't explode the way he normally would. Instead, he forced a tight smile. Of course, dear. Don't be gone too long. You know how I worry. The threat in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. Otto caught it too. I could tell by the way his expression hardened. 20 minutes later, I found myself sitting across from Otto in a small cafe on the other side of town, feeling like I was 19 again. He'd insisted on driving me there, and his car, a modest sedan despite his wealth, surprised me. I'd expected something flashy, but Otto had never been about showing off. You don't have to pretend with me, Elizabeth, he said gently after the waitress brought our coffee. I can see it in your eyes, the way you flinched when he raised his voice. How long has he been treating you like that? I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup, needing something to hold on to. It's not what you think. Bradley's just set in his ways. Traditional. Traditional men don't humiliate their wives in public, Otto replied firmly. Traditional men don't speak to the women they love the way he spoke to you Sunday night. The word love hung in the air between us, heavy with implications and memories. I stared into my coffee, afraid to meet Otto's eyes. Tell me about your life, Otto said, changing the subject but not really. Are you happy, Elizabeth? Really happy? The question was so simple, but I couldn't remember the last time anyone had asked me that. When was the last time anyone had cared about my happiness? I have Dylan, I said finally. He's a good son. He's successful, kind, engaged to a wonderful woman. That's enough. That's not what I asked, Otto said softly. I looked up at him then. Really looked at him. The years had been kind to Otto. His hair was silver now, and lines crinkled around his eyes, but he was still handsome. More than that, he still looked at me like I mattered, like my thoughts and feelings were important. I used to paint, I found myself saying. When Dylan was little, I'd paint while he napped. Landscapes mostly, flowers, beautiful things. Bradley said it was a waste of money and time, so I stopped. Do you still want to paint? Otto asked. I'm 59 years old, I laughed bitterly. It's too late for dreams like that. Elizabeth, Otto leaned forward, his voice intense. I'm 60 years old and I still have dreams. It's never too late. We sat in silence for a moment, and I felt something stirring in my chest that I'd thought was dead. Hope. What about you? I asked. Are you married? Children? Otto's expression grew sad. I was married once, briefly, about 10 years after you left. Her name was Catherine. She was a good woman, but... He paused, choosing his words carefully. I couldn't love her the way she deserved. She knew it too. We divorced amicably after 2 years. No children. Sophia? I asked, remembering his beautiful daughter. Adopted, Otto explained. Catherine and I adopted her when she was 8. Her parents were killed in a car accident, and she was in the foster system. Even after Catherine and I divorced, Sophia chose to stay with me. She's been the light of my life. I thought about Dylan, how he'd been the light of my life too, the only thing that made my marriage bearable. Elizabeth, Otto said quietly, I need to tell you something. After you disappeared, I looked for you everywhere. I hired private investigators, followed every lead. When I finally found you, you were already married to Bradley, already had Dylan. You looked happy in the photos, so I stayed away. My heart clenched. You found me? About 15 years ago, Otto admitted. The investigator took pictures of your family at Dylan's high school graduation. You were smiling. Bradley had his arm around you. I thought you'd found the life you wanted. Those pictures, I whispered, remembering that day. I was smiling because Dylan was graduating, not because I was happy with Bradley. Otto's hands tightened around his coffee cup. If I'd known, if I'd had any idea what your marriage was really like. What would you have done? I asked. I would have fought for you, he said without hesitation. I would have reminded you that you deserved better. I would have shown you that there were other options. The intensity in his voice made my heart race. This wasn't just nostalgia or curiosity. Otto still had feelings for me. Real feelings. Otto, I began, but he held up his hand. I know this is complicated, he said. I know you have a life, responsibilities. But Elizabeth, seeing you Sunday night, seeing how he treated you, I can't pretend I don't still care about you. I can't pretend that losing you wasn't the biggest regret of my life. Tears started flowing down my cheeks. You don't understand. I can't just. Bradley would never let me go. And Dylan is 39 years old, Otto said gently. He's engaged, starting his own family. Don't you think it's time you started living for yourself? Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message. Bradley, where are you? You've been gone 2 hours. Get home now. Otto saw me reading the message, saw the fear that crossed my face. I have to go, I said, standing up quickly. He'll be angry if I'm late. Otto stood too, pulling out his wallet. Elizabeth, wait. Take my card. If you ever need anything at all, you call me. Day or night. He pressed a business card into my hand, then gently took my other hand and squeezed it. I meant what I said Sunday night, he whispered. I never stopped loving you, and I'm not giving up on us this time. The drive back to my house was a blur. My mind kept replaying Otto's words, the gentle way he'd touched my hand, the promise in his voice. For 39 years, I'd convinced myself that I'd made the right choice, that marrying Bradley had been the practical, responsible thing to do. But sitting across from Otto in that little cafe, I remembered what it felt like to be cherished instead of tolerated. I remembered what it felt like to have someone care about my dreams, my thoughts, my happiness. I pulled into our driveway and saw Bradley's silhouette in the front window, waiting for me. My hands shook as I turned off the engine. In my purse, Otto's business card felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. As I walked toward the house, I realized that everything had changed. I'd spent 3 decades being Bradley's wife, Dylan's mother, but I'd forgotten how to be Elizabeth. Otto had reminded me that she still existed, buried beneath years of submission and silence. The question was, after all these years, was it too late to set her free? Bradley opened the door before I could knock, his face dark with suspicion. "You were gone a long time for grocery shopping," he said, noting my empty hands. "I forgot my wallet," I lied smoothly. "I'll go back tomorrow." As I walked past him into the house, I felt Otto's business card pressing against my palm through my purse. For the first time in decades, I had a secret that was mine alone. And surprisingly, it didn't feel like a betrayal. It felt like the first breath of freedom I'd taken in 39 years. The secret meetings with Otto continued for 2 weeks. We'd meet at different cafes around town, always somewhere Bradley wouldn't think to look for me. I told him I was running errands or visiting the library, small lies that felt enormous to someone who'd spent 39 years being completely honest. Each time I saw Otto, I felt a little more like myself again. He brought me books of poetry, listened when I talked about the paintings I dreamed of creating, and told me about his work building affordable housing communities. When he spoke about his projects, his eyes lit up the same way they had when we were young, and I fell in love with him all over again. But the best part was how he looked at me. Not like Bradley, who saw me as a collection of failures and inconveniences, but like I was precious, like I was worth listening to, like I mattered. It was during our 4th meeting that Otto asked the question I'd been dreading. "Elizabeth," he said gently, setting down his coffee cup. "I need to know about Dylan's father." We were sitting in a small bookshop cafe on the north side of town, surrounded by the smell of old books and fresh pastries. My hands trembled as I reached for my purse, pulling out the silver locket I'd carried for 39 years. "You gave this to me for my 19th birthday, I said, opening it to reveal the pressed flower inside. I was wearing it the day I found out I was pregnant. Otto stared at the locket, recognition dawning in his eyes. "You kept it all these years?" "It was the only piece of you I could keep," I whispered. "Otto, Dylan isn't Bradley's son. He's yours." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Otto's face went completely pale, then flushed with a mixture of emotions I couldn't read. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "My son? Dylan is my son?" I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "I was going to tell you, but then Margaret showed me that newspaper article about your father's business, and she convinced me that you couldn't provide for us. I was 19 and scared and alone, and I thought I was protecting him." Otto's hands shook as he reached across the table to take mine. "Elizabeth, that newspaper article. My father's company did fail, but it wasn't because of anything dishonest. He'd co-signed loans for friends who couldn't pay them back. We lost everything trying to help other people. Within 5 years, I'd rebuilt what we lost and more. The cruel irony of it hit me like a physical blow. I'd given up the love of my life to protect my son from poverty, and in doing so, I'd condemned us both to a life that was poor in every way that mattered. 39 years, Otto whispered, his voice breaking. I missed 39 years of my son's life. "Otto, I'm so sorry," I sobbed. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought—" "Shh," he said, moving to sit beside me, pulling me into his arms. "You were 19 and alone. You did what you thought was best with the information you had. But Elizabeth, we have to tell him the truth." The thought of telling Dylan that his entire life was built on a lie terrified me. What if he hates me? What if he thinks I'm a horrible person for lying to him all these years? "Dylan is a good man," Otto said firmly. "I can see that, even from the little time I've spent with him. Good men understand that sometimes people make impossible choices in impossible situations. That evening, I came home to find Dylan's car in our driveway. He was sitting at the kitchen table with Bradley, and both of them looked up when I walked in. The tension in the room was immediately palpable. "Mom," Dylan said, standing up to hug me. "Dad told me you've been spending time with Mr. Blackwell. Is everything okay?" I shot a look at Bradley, who was watching me with cold calculation. He'd been building his case against me, gathering information to use as ammunition. "Your mother has been acting strangely since the engagement dinner," Bradley said, his voice dripping with false concern. "Running off for hours, making excuses. I'm worried about her mental state." "My mental state is fine," I said firmly, surprised by the strength in my own voice. "Is it?" Bradley asked. "Because from where I sit, it looks like you're having some kind of midlife crisis, getting swept up in romantic fantasies about the past." Dylan frowned, looking between us. "What's he talking about, Mom?" I looked at my son, Otto's son, and realized I couldn't keep lying. Not anymore. Dylan deserved the truth, even if it destroyed everything. "Dylan," I said quietly, "I need to tell you something about your father." Bradley's face went white. "Elizabeth, don't you dare—" "Shut up," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in decades. "For once in your life, just shut up and let me speak." Dylan's eyes widened. He'd never heard me talk to Bradley that way before. 39 years ago, I was in love with someone else, I continued, my voice gaining strength. His name was Otto Blackwell, and we were planning to get married. When I found out I was pregnant, I was manipulated into believing that Otto couldn't provide for us, that marrying Bradley was the right thing to do. So I lied to Otto, broke his heart, and married Bradley to give you a name. The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the tick of the wall clock. Dylan stared at me in shock, while Bradley's face cycled through rage, fear, and calculation. "You're saying," Dylan said slowly, "that Otto Blackwell is my biological father?" I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "I've regretted it every day for 39 years. "This is insane," Bradley exploded, standing up so quickly his chair toppled backward. "Elizabeth, you're having some kind of breakdown. Dylan, don't listen to this nonsense." But Dylan wasn't looking at Bradley. He was staring at me with a mixture of shock and understanding. "That's why you looked so sad all the time when I was growing up," he said quietly. "That's why you never seemed happy, even at my graduations and birthdays. You were mourning the life you'd given up." "I was never unhappy because of you," I said quickly. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me. But yes, I mourned what could have been." Bradley stepped between us, his face twisted with rage. "This is enough. Dylan, your mother is clearly having some kind of mental breakdown. She's been sneaking around town with this man, filling her head with romantic fantasies." "Have you been meeting with him?" Dylan asked me, ignoring Bradley completely. "Yes," I admitted. "We've been talking, trying to understand what happened all those years ago." "And?" Dylan prompted. I looked at my son, this good man I'd raised, and told him the truth. And I still love him. I never stopped loving him. The admission hung in the air like a bomb that had just exploded. Bradley's face turned purple with rage, but Dylan's expression was thoughtful, almost relieved. "Mom," Dylan said softly, "how has he treated you? Bradley, I mean. Really?" The question caught me off guard. In all the years of my marriage, no one had ever asked me that question directly. "Dylan, don't encourage this," Bradley warned. "Your mother is clearly—" "I wasn't talking to you," Dylan snapped, and I saw Otto's strength in my son's voice. "Mom, I asked you a question." I looked at Dylan, then at Bradley, then back at my son. For 39 years, I'd protected Bradley's reputation, made excuses for his behavior, pretended that emotional abuse was just his way. "He treats me like a servant," I said quietly. "He humiliates me in public, controls every aspect of my life, and makes me feel worthless every single day. Dylan's jaw clenched, and I saw anger flash in his eyes, not at me, but at the man he'd called father his entire life. "Is that true?" Dylan asked Bradley. "Your mother exaggerates," Bradley said dismissively. "She's always been overly dramatic." "Answer the question," Dylan said, his voice deadly calm. "Have you been emotionally abusing my mother for 39 years? Bradley sputtered, clearly not expecting to be challenged by his son. "I don't have to listen to this. Elizabeth, tell him you're sorry for this ridiculous story and let's move on." But I wasn't sorry. For the first time in decades, I wasn't sorry for telling the truth. "Dylan," I said, "there's something else you should know. Otto doesn't know that you're his son. I never told him." Dylan stared at me for a long moment, then pulled out his phone. "What's his number?" "Dylan, what are you doing?" "I'm calling my father," Dylan said firmly. "My real father." Bradley lunged for the phone, but Dylan stepped away, his hand already dialing. "Hello, Mr. Blackwell. This is Dylan Morrison. I think it's time we had a conversation about my mother. And about me." As I listened to my son arrange to meet the man who was his biological father, I felt 39 years of lies and secrets finally cracking apart. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. Bradley stood in the corner, his face a mask of rage and defeat. He'd lost control of the narrative, lost his grip on both Dylan and me. For the first time in our marriage, he was powerless. And I realized that I was no longer afraid of him. "I'm leaving," I announced, surprising myself with the finality in my voice. "I'm filing for divorce." "You can't," Bradley snarled. "You have nothing. You are nothing without me." "You're wrong," I said, standing up straighter than I had in years. "I have 39 years of life to reclaim, and I have a son who loves me enough to support my happiness." Dylan finished his phone call and looked at me with something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Respect. "Otto's coming over," he said. "It's time for this family to start telling the truth." As we waited for Otto to arrive, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump into an unknown future. It was terrifying, but for the first time in decades, I wasn't jumping alone. I had my son. I had the man I'd never stopped loving, and most importantly, I finally had myself back. Otto arrived 30 minutes later, and I watched through the front window as he parked his car and walked toward our house. Even from a distance, I could see the determination in his stride, the way his shoulders were set with purpose. This wasn't the gentle college boy I'd fallen in love with. This was a man who'd built an empire and wasn't afraid of confrontation. Bradley had spent the last half hour pacing the living room like a caged animal, alternating between threats and attempts at manipulation. "You think he really wants you now?" he'd sneered. "You're 59 years old, Elizabeth. You're not the young girl he remembers." But Dylan had stayed by my side, his presence giving me strength I'd forgotten I possessed. When Otto knocked, I opened the door myself. His eyes immediately found mine, searching for signs that I was all right. When he saw my tear-stained face but steady posture, something shifted in his expression, relief mixed with fierce protectiveness. "Elizabeth," he said softly, then looked at Dylan. "And you must be my son." The words hung in the air, heavy with 39 years of lost time. Dylan stepped forward, extending his hand to Otto, and I watched as father and son met for the first time as adults who knew the truth. "I have so many questions," Dylan said quietly. "And I have 39 years of answers," Otto replied, his voice thick with emotion. Bradley chose that moment to assert himself, striding into the foyer with false bravado. "Well, isn't this touching? The happy family reunion." His voice dripped with sarcasm. "Otto, you've caused quite enough trouble. I think it's time you left." Otto turned to face Bradley, and I saw something cold and dangerous flash in his eyes. "Actually, Bradley, I think it's time you and I had a conversation. Man to man. I don't have anything to say to you, Bradley replied, but there was uncertainty in his voice. He was used to intimidating me, but Otto was a different proposition entirely. But I have plenty to say to you, Otto said, his voice quiet but deadly. For instance, I'd like to know how you justify 39 years of emotional abuse. I'd like to know how you sleep at night knowing you've spent 4 decades destroying the spirit of the most beautiful woman I've ever known. Bradley's face flushed red. You don't know anything about our marriage. Elizabeth is my wife. Elizabeth is not your property, Dylan interrupted, and I felt a surge of pride at the strength in my son's voice. And from what I've observed over the years, you've treated her like an unpaid servant rather than a partner. I watched this confrontation unfold, feeling like I was seeing my life from the outside for the first time. Bradley, who had seemed so powerful for so long, suddenly looked small and pathetic standing between Otto and Dylan. Elizabeth, Otto said, turning to me, I want you to know that whatever you decide, I'll support you. If you want to try to work things out with Bradley, I'll respect that. But if you want to leave, I'll help you. You won't be alone. The offer hung between us like a lifeline. For 39 years, I'd felt trapped because I had nowhere to go, no resources of my own. Bradley controlled our bank accounts, our social circle, every aspect of my life. But Otto was offering me a way out. I can't, I whispered, old fears rising up. Bradley's right about one thing. I don't have anything. No money, no career, no place to live. I'm 59 years old. How do I start over now? Otto stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. Elizabeth, do you remember what I told you about the affordable housing communities I've built? One of them has a beautiful art studio that's been sitting empty for months. The previous tenant was an elderly woman who taught painting classes there. She passed away last spring, and I've been looking for the right person to take over. My heart stopped. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you want it, the space is yours. Rent-free for the first year while you get back on your feet. There's even a small apartment above the studio. You could teach art classes, sell your paintings, be the artist you were always meant to be. The generosity of the offer took my breath away, but Bradley immediately jumped on it. You see? He said triumphantly. He's trying to buy you, Elizabeth. This is exactly what I've been warning you about. He thinks he can swoop in and rescue you because he has money. No, Otto said firmly, his eyes never leaving mine. I'm offering Elizabeth what she deserves. Respect, support, and the chance to live her own life. Something you've never given her. I looked around the room at these 3 men, each representing a different path for my future. Bradley, who wanted to maintain control and keep me trapped in a life that was slowly killing my spirit. Dylan, who wanted me to be happy, but was trying to respect both the man who'd raised him and the man who'd fathered him. And Otto, who was offering me freedom, but asking for nothing in return. The choice should have been easy, but 39 years of conditioning don't disappear overnight. I need time to think, I said finally. Time to think? Bradley exploded. Elizabeth, this is insane. You're talking about throwing away our entire life together for some romantic fantasy. You're not 20 anymore. Stop, I said, my voice stronger than I'd heard it in years. Just stop talking. Bradley's mouth snapped shut in shock. I'd never spoken to him that way before. You're right about one thing, I continued. I'm not 20 anymore. I'm 59 years old, and I've wasted nearly 40 years of my life being afraid. Afraid of making the wrong choice, afraid of disappointing people, afraid of taking risks. I looked directly at Otto. I'm tired of being afraid. Otto's eyes filled with hope, but he didn't push. He just waited. Bradley, I said, turning to face my husband, I want a divorce. The words came out clearer and stronger than I'd expected. Bradley staggered backward as if I'd physically struck him. You can't be serious, he stammered. Elizabeth, you're having some kind of breakdown. You need to think about this rationally. I've been thinking about this for 39 years, I replied. I should have left the first time you made me feel worthless. I should have left when you started controlling every aspect of my life. I should have left when I realized that you saw me as a convenience rather than a person. Where will you go? Bradley asked desperately. What will you do? You have no skills, no education, no— She has me, Otto said quietly. And she has Dylan. And most importantly, she has herself. That's more than enough. Dylan nodded, moving to stand beside me. Mom, I should have spoken up years ago. I saw how he treated you, and I was too much of a coward to say anything. I'm sorry for that. You were protecting the only family structure you knew, I said, placing a hand on Dylan's arm. I don't blame you for that. Bradley looked around the room, realizing that he'd lost all his allies. His face cycled through anger, desperation, and finally calculation. Fine, he said, his voice turning cold, but don't think this will be easy, Elizabeth. I'll fight you on everything. The house, the savings, all of it. You'll get nothing from me. I don't want anything from you, I replied. I just want my freedom. And you'll have it, Otto said firmly. My lawyer will contact you tomorrow to discuss the divorce proceedings. This can be as easy or as difficult as you want to make it, Bradley. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Otto had resources that Bradley couldn't match, and we all knew it. This isn't over, Bradley snarled, grabbing his keys from the hall table. Elizabeth, when you come to your senses and realize what a mistake you've made, don't come crying to me. He slammed the door behind him so hard that a picture fell off the wall. The three of us stood in the sudden silence, processing what had just happened. Are you sure about this? Dylan asked quietly. Once you start divorce proceedings, there's no going back. I thought about the question seriously. Was I sure? Leaving Bradley meant giving up the security of a marriage, even a bad one. It meant starting over at 59 with nothing but hope and the promise of help from a man I'd lost contact with for nearly 4 decades. But then I looked at Otto, really looked at him. This wasn't just about rekindling an old romance. This was about reclaiming the woman I'd been before I learned to make myself small and quiet and invisible. I'm sure, I said finally. For the first time in 39 years, I'm absolutely sure. Otto stepped closer, his hands gently framing my face the way he had at the country club. Elizabeth, I need you to know that I'm not trying to rescue you. You don't need rescuing, you need support. There's a difference. The distinction mattered more than he could know. Bradley had always positioned himself as my savior, the man who'd given me security and respectability. But Otto was offering something different. Partnership, equality, respect. What happens now? I asked. Now you pack whatever you need for tonight, Otto said practically. You can stay in the guest room at my place until we get the apartment above the studio ready. Tomorrow we'll meet with my lawyer and start the legal process. And after that? Dylan asked. Otto smiled, and for the first time since this all began, his expression was purely joyful. After that, your mother gets to discover who she really is when she's free to be herself. As I walked upstairs to pack a suitcase, I felt like I was floating. Every step away from the life I'd known felt like shedding a heavy coat that I'd worn too long in the wrong season. In my bedroom, Bradley's and my bedroom, I corrected myself, I packed carefully. I took my clothes, my few pieces of jewelry, and the books of poetry that Otto had given me in college, which I'd hidden in the back of my closet for decades. Most importantly, I took the silver locket with the pressed flower inside. It had sustained me through 39 years of loneliness, a tiny piece of proof that I had once been loved completely and unconditionally. But now I didn't need to hide it anymore. As I walked down the stairs with my suitcase, Otto and Dylan were talking quietly in the living room. They looked up when they heard my footsteps. Ready? Otto asked. I nodded, then took one last look around the house where I'd spent most of my adult life. It should have felt sad, leaving behind so many years and memories. Instead, it felt like emerging from a long, dark tunnel into sunlight. "I'm ready," I said. 6 months later, I stood in front of my easel in the art studio, a paintbrush in my hand and sunlight streaming through the tall windows. The canvas before me was alive with color. A landscape of the lake where Otto and I used to walk when we were young, but painted with the wisdom and experience of a woman who had finally found her way home. The divorce had been finalized just 2 weeks ago. True to his threats, Bradley had fought me on everything, but Otto's lawyer was excellent. And in the end, Bradley's attempts to control the proceedings only made him look petty and vindictive. I'd walked away with enough money to be comfortable, but more importantly, I'd walked away with my freedom. The art studio had become everything Otto had promised and more. I taught painting classes 3 afternoons a week to a group of wonderful women ranging in age from 30 to 80. We called ourselves the Late Bloomers, and every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, the studio filled with laughter and creative energy. I'd sold 12 paintings in the past 4 months, enough to prove to myself that this wasn't just a hobby, but a genuine second career. But the best part was living above the studio. The small apartment was nothing like the grand house I'd shared with Bradley, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every book, every coffee cup had been chosen by me. For me. When I woke up in the morning, I could hear birds singing instead of Bradley's criticisms. The doorbell chimed, and I looked up to see Otto walking into the studio. Even after 6 months, my heart still skipped a beat when I saw him. We'd been taking things slowly. I'd needed time to rediscover who I was outside of my marriage to Bradley, and Otto had been patient and supportive throughout the process. "How's the painting coming?" he asked, walking over to stand beside me at the easel. "Almost finished," I said, adding a touch of gold to the autumn leaves reflected in the lake water. "I think it's one of my best pieces." Otto studied the canvas, his expression thoughtful. "You've captured something beautiful here. The light, the way it dances on the water. It reminds me of that day we spent at the lake when you were 19. Do you remember? It was October, and you wore that yellow sweater that matched the leaves." I set down my paintbrush and turned to face him, amazed as always by how clearly he remembered our time together. "I remember everything about that day. You read me Elizabeth Barrett Browning's sonnets under the oak tree. 'How do I love thee? Let me count the ways,'" Otto quoted softly, his eyes never leaving mine. "I can't believe you still remember that poem," I said, feeling tears spring to my eyes. "I remember everything about you, Elizabeth," he replied, reaching up to gently touch my face. "I've had 40 years to memorize every moment we shared." The intensity in his voice made my breath catch. We'd been spending time together almost every day. He'd take me to dinner, we'd walk through art museums, he'd bring me flowers from his garden. But we hadn't talked about the future, about what this relationship was becoming. "Otto," I began, but he placed a gentle finger against my lips. "Before you say anything," he said, "I have something for you." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My heart stopped. 40 years ago, I was saving money to buy you an engagement ring," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I'd picked it out, had it on layaway at the jewelry store downtown. When you disappeared, I couldn't bring myself to cancel the order. I kept paying on it, month after month, year after year, telling myself I was being foolish but unable to let go." He opened the box, revealing a simple but beautiful solitaire diamond ring. It wasn't large or flashy. It was exactly what I would have chosen for myself at 19 and exactly what I'd choose now at 59. "I picked it up from the jeweler last week," Otto continued. "Elizabeth Marie, will you marry me? Will you let me spend whatever years I have left trying to make up for the 40 we lost?" I stared at the ring, then at Otto's hopeful, nervous face. This wasn't the desperate proposal of a young man afraid of losing his girlfriend. This was the considered offer of a mature man who knew exactly what he was asking and what he was promising in return. "Yes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Otto. I'll marry you." His face lit up with joy as he slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting 40 years just for this moment. He pulled me into his arms and kissed me, and I felt like I was 19 again, full of hope and dreams and infinite possibilities. When we finally broke apart, I was crying and laughing at the same time. "I never thought I'd get a second chance at this kind of happiness," I said. "We're not getting a second chance," Otto replied, his arms still around me. "We're getting our first chance. Everything that happened before was just preparation." The wedding was small and perfect. Dylan walked me down the aisle of a little chapel surrounded by gardens, and Sophia stood as Otto's best woman. The Late Bloomers painting group served as my bridesmaids, creating a bouquet of women in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, all of us proving that it's never too late for new beginnings. Margaret Morrison, Bradley's sister who had convinced me to marry him all those years ago, showed up unexpectedly at the reception. I hadn't seen her since the divorce, and I braced myself for confrontation or criticism. Instead, she approached me with tears in her eyes. "Elizabeth," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology, a huge one. I convinced you to marry my brother because I thought financial security was the most important thing a woman could have. I was wrong. I can see now how happy you are. Really happy. And I realize what I cost you all those years ago." Her apology surprised me. For 40 years, I'd carried resentment toward Margaret for her role in pushing me toward Bradley. But standing there in my wedding dress, holding Otto's hand, I found that the anger was gone. "We all did what we thought was best with the information we had," I said, echoing Otto's words from months ago. "I forgive you, Margaret." She hugged me tightly, and I felt another piece of the past heal and release its hold on me. Bradley didn't attend the wedding, but I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd already started dating someone new, a much younger woman who worked as a secretary at his car dealership. I felt sorry for her, but I also felt a deep sense of relief that it was no longer my responsibility to manage his ego or endure his control. The honeymoon was a trip to Italy, something I'd dreamed about for decades but never imagined I'd actually experience. Otto and I spent 2 weeks wandering through art museums, sitting in sidewalk cafes, and talking about everything we'd missed during our 40 years apart. "Do you have any regrets?" he asked one evening as we sat by the Trevi Fountain in Rome, watching tourists throw coins and make wishes. I considered the question seriously. Did I regret the 40 years I'd spent with Bradley? The dreams I'd deferred? The woman I'd suppressed? The time I'd lost? "I regret the pain," I said finally. "I regret the loneliness and the fear. But I don't regret Dylan. And I don't regret the lessons I learned about my own strength. If I hadn't been through all of that, I might not appreciate what we have now." Otto took my hand, running his thumb over my wedding ring, the ring that had waited 40 years for me to be ready to wear it. "You know what I love most about us now?" he said. "What?" "We're not trying to recapture our youth. We're not trying to pretend we're 19 again. We're two people who've lived full lives, who've made mistakes and learned from them, who know exactly how precious this kind of love is." He was right. What Otto and I had now was deeper and richer than what we'd shared as teenagers. It was love tempered by experience, strengthened by loss, and made precious by the knowledge of how easily it could be lost. A year after our wedding, I held my first solo art exhibition at a gallery in downtown Dallas. 30 paintings filled the space, landscapes, portraits, still lifes, all created during my year of freedom and rediscovery. The opening night was packed with friends, art collectors, and complete strangers who'd been drawn by the beauty and emotion in my work. Dylan stood beside one of my paintings, talking animatedly to a potential buyer. Sophia was across the room, radiant in her pregnancy. She and Dylan were expecting their first child in the spring. Otto moved through the crowd, introducing me to important people, his pride in my work evident to everyone who met us. "Mrs. Blackwell?" the gallery owner said, approaching me with a satisfied smile. "I'm pleased to tell you that we've sold 18 paintings tonight. You have a waiting list of people who want to commission work." Mrs. Blackwell. I was still getting used to my new name, to the identity that came with it. Elizabeth Morrison had been defined by her marriage to Bradley, by her role as Dylan's mother, by her ability to make herself invisible. Elizabeth Blackwell was an artist, a wife by choice rather than obligation, a woman who'd learned to take up space in the world. "Thank you," I said. "This has been more wonderful than I ever imagined." As the evening wound down, Otto and I found ourselves alone in the gallery, surrounded by my paintings. The red dots marking sold pieces dotted the walls like small victories. "Proud of yourself?" Otto asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. I leaned back against his chest, looking around at the visual representation of my new life. Amazed, more than proud. A year ago, I was 59 and convinced my life was essentially over. "Now look at this." "Now look at you," Otto corrected gently. "This isn't about the paintings or the gallery or even our marriage. This is about you remembering who you were always meant to be." Later that night, we sat on the balcony of our penthouse apartment. Otto had convinced me to move in with him 6 months after our wedding, looking out over the Dallas skyline. The city sparkled below us, full of lights and life and possibilities. "What are you thinking about?" Otto asked, noticing my contemplative mood. "That young girl who used to dream about having a life like this," I said. "She had to wait 60 years to get it, but she got it." "We got it," Otto corrected, taking my hand. "And we're going to enjoy every minute we have left." Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.